Hello and welcome to this new masterclass. Today we're going to export 3D anime models from Blender to Sketchfab. Alright, this model that we see right here is Jor. This was created for Patreons long ago. So this is a poseable mode which was created using Rigify. So the entire body is poseable, okay? And we're going to move some of the controllers that we have right here in order to pose her for a very dramatic and dynamic pose, and later on export it to Sketchfab. As you can see, there are different components here, and you should always take care of the sunlight that you're going to be using for this scene. But in this case, we're going to just get rid of all of that, and we're going to just concentrate on her pose specifically. We're going to use an unlit material later on in Sketchfab. So let's start. The first thing we want to do here is to grab a very good angle for the camera. In this case, we need to exaggerate the limbs so that they can get a little bit distorted and exaggerated with the pose that we're going to be using. So that's what I'm doing right here. First thing that we want to do is to get a very accurate, or rather dynamic forward thrusting. And that's the main idea here. So let's start by posing her arms and also deforming the general shape of the arm so that it will not be too linear. So one of the aspects I always see in models that try to imitate anime styles is that everything is too rigid, everything is too linear. Like it goes from here to here, like the leg is going from here to there. No, you really need to distort your meshes. Next, we're going to add a swipe mesh. Now, this thing is going to be very interesting for everyone who has been asking me for a long time. How do we bake procedural textures, procedural anime textures into the models that we create? So we're going to be covering that ahead in the videos. So now let's work in the upper part of her body, which basically gives us the hint and the clue for how strong this action is. Okay, so I'm going to be posing her right arm and her head as much as I can, trying to make the best angle forward the camera. So now we're going to be saving a pulsable and deformable rig and a second version, which is going to be the one that we're going to be working for the rest of the project, which is going to be a destructive version. Okay, so let's delete every other modifier that we have right here, all of those solidify modifiers which create the outline, and I'm going to be leaving only the armature. So what we want to do is to activate these two icons that you see right here so that her pose, either on edit mode or in pose mode, will remain the same. This is important, please bear this in mind. So now we're going to go into edit mode, and it will not jump to the original T-pose where we had her before. So this is her general pose. It looks good, but now we're going to be creating the corrective shape keys, and we want to press this plus button twice. It's going to create the basis blend shape, and now we're going to name this corrective 001. What we're going to do in that corrective 001 blend shape is create as the name says it, a corrective shape for every part of the body. Please do not forget to activate all of the icons on the armature modifier so that we can start working. So what we're going to do is to push this blend shape all the way to 1, and from there on switch to sculpt mode and start sculpting. Otherwise you will not be able to sculpt the corrective shapes. This is important. So as you can see, I'm going to be using the smooth modifier, the smooth brush from the Sculpt set, and the grab brush as well. And this is all happening, don't forget, in the corrective blend shape. This is very important. This model is created by different parts, so we need to add to every part those two blend shapes, the basis and then the corrective 001. Corrective 001 is just an arbitrary name that you can use so that you can know that all of the different parts of the body that have this name are going to be joined together later on. So now I'm going to be grabbing the grab brush again. Up there you can see the settings, radius 145, and strength 0.497. Now, whenever we want to isolate one of the objects on the scene, we press the forward bar, the forward dash in the numpad. But that jumps out of the frame, as you can see right here. And we also need to activate those two editing armature icons on the modifier. So now what I'm going to do here is try to grab the vertices and move them. Okay, don't forget you need to be on corrective and the value set to 1 in order for you to work in sculpt mode. So I'm going to go back into edit mode, and then if I press forward in numpad, it jumps me out of the frame. So this is very annoying. What we want to do is to be able to isolate the section that we select, right? So in order to do that, you can go to preferences, and from there you can go into key maps, type with the name local, and you can see here 3D view. And what we want to do here is to check on the local view, unfold that, and then uncheck frame selected, just so that it can reset. Also local view, as you can see right there, set all of those parameters. You can put pause on the video and check those parameters that match yours. In that way, now you can press forward slash, and then it will stay there. So it will isolate the object. Now let's talk about another issue that you may have. Like I mentioned before, this is my entire workflow, and I want to present to you what some of the issues that you will come across whenever you're working with your models could happen when using Blender. One of those things is that you get this pivot point all the way up there, because that belongs to the original position of the model. So even in the case that I change this to local coordinates or normal coordinates, and then use the average points selected or the individual points selected, I will still get the trouble that if I want to use the proportional tool, it will launch it, or it will use that pivot point that is all the way up there, and it's really annoying. So I'm going to be using the bounded box center because it seems like the most logical thing, but still you will move your vertices and feel that the weight is off. It's not going to be in the center because, as I mentioned before, we're using a post model, not the original T-based model, and that is why I needed to correct this somehow in some other way. So I'm going to be using the proportional tool, and that is going to be set up from all the way up there. But no problem, I'll try to do my best so that you can see. But that's something that you have to keep in mind, that you will not have your immediate vertex center whenever you select your points. So I'm going to be fast forwarding this section because that's everything I did for this. Fortunately, these were separate objects. In the case that you have everything joined as a single mesh object, that is going to be an issue, that is going to be problematic. But if you have different separate objects like this, you will not have that much trouble. Now again, don't forget that we're working on the corrective 001 plus value all the way set to 1 in edit mode or in sculpt mode. And this is important because otherwise you will not be able to apply your sculpting brushes. So again, I'm using the top upmost pivot point, but it doesn't matter because later on I will go to sculpt, inflate this area, and also grab it. Now I'm going to be smoothing out some of the regions here for the dress, and also pumping out just a little bit more that back side of her. And here I'm going to be continuing to sculpt some interesting folds for the dress so that it will get a dynamic shape. Okay, so never forget that I'm using all of these sculpting tools having the reference on the right upper side. So now let's talk about how I created the speed lines. Okay, so I duplicated the mesh, I subdivided this region right here, and then I grabbed all of those vertices, and then I grabbed the proportional tool to deform that and have it some sort of like bent angle, as you can see right here, and I created another copy, which is a third copy for that. Okay, so now let's talk about how you can use grease pencil to create a more dynamic shape. As I mentioned before, it is a very usual mistake to create very straight lines. In 3D, everything that you create in your model will also have like straight lines. But in 2D, that's not the way to go. We want to have some dynamic volumes, and we want to have some smooth harmonic shapes that have contrast. So I know it kind of gets very difficult at times, but if you concentrate on what you want to see in camera, then you will have this as an easy part. So we're going to go into view, annotations. I'm going to switch the annotation color, in this case to a bright red, and from there on I'm going to be switching to the annotation tool, and I will switch the view coordinate system, if we can say it that way, because I really want to accentuate this part of the body. So as you can see, this is what we want. So the arm right here is too bulky, and we need to get the correct angles to get harmony from the shoulder all the way to the hand. So let me just show you what I mean. So we want to have the flow from the elbow all the way to the shoulder and also to the hand. From this camera angle position, we want to have this as harmoniously as the muscle can get in this pose. So that's what I'm doing right here. Okay, I'm trying to move the volumes as we expected. So from this other camera angle, we're also going to be modifying her pose. Let me just create again another pose right here, and this is the harmony that we're looking for. Okay, and as you can see, the angle of the elbow is quite off, so we need to pull this thing in order for us to make a more harmonious shape to the annotation that we have right here in the grease pencil from this camera angle. And I'm bulking her shoulder to give her more strength, and also the elbow needs to be more pointy. And you can repeat this process of sketching over your mesh to create better smooth angles, very favorable angles for the camera to capture from your mesh. Okay, so to give that freedom, if we can say it so, to capture more of the camera angles for the body. So let's refine this section of the dress. So let's continue to refine this angle as well. And the folds in the arm are very important. So now let's talk about how we can export this to Sketchfab in the general overview, so that you can take your time to really check what's going on with the model. So the first thing we want to do is to apply the blend shapes that we created, the corrective blend shapes. So to do that without destroying the model, what you need to do is to delete, first of all, the basis blend shape. That's the one that you're going to be deleting first, this one right here. So press minus, and that will delete the blend shape, and that will allow the corrective 001 blend shape to stay on top of it. So then you will delete that, and now the model stays perfectly in sync with what you had before. And then you want to apply the armature for every part of the body of your model. Okay, this is important, so that way you will not carry on an armature to Sketchfab. And then you need to check for the compatible materials that you have right here. In the case that you're exporting textures, make sure those textures are path relative and also that are connected directly to a Emmission node, or in the case that you're in the older Blender version, in the background node. Okay, so you will not have the chance to create any fancy shaders. No, you just use the image, use the emission shader connected to the output material, and then you're good to go. Like I'm showing right here, that's the previous workflow. In the case that you're using a very old Blender version, this is how you did it. You need to go to your world, copy the background shader node, and paste it into your object material shader node, like I have right here. With this background, it represented an animation shader. So this is how it looks. I just picked this dark blue color, and now we're going to start experimenting by exporting this. So I'm going to be coming here, export, and what I'm going to select is the Fbx format. Okay, in that I'm going to be selecting the objects that I have selected to export, and just the meshes, because in this case that's the only thing we are looking forward to. So I'm going to be copying this path and clicking here to export the Fbx. You can see all of the other settings remain the same, and now we're going to go to sketchfab.com, which is a place where you can upload your 3D models and showcase them on different sites by embedding them or just by sharing the link so that the users will see your model directly. So there are 4 ways to upload here the files. The first of all is by using a native blend file, then the zip format containing the OBJ, FBX or GLTF formats, and lastly using a GLTF format which can compress everything in one single file, materials and objects all together with animations, as also does the Fbx file. So I'm using here the editor, as you can see right here, and I want to show you how to save in this case and also edit your model. So I just uploaded the boots, as you can see, and now I'm going to click on edit 3D settings. You can roll here, you can drag and move your mouse so that you can look around your model. This is how it will see if you want to directly publish it as it is. Okay, you also get to display this model is a draft, so it is not published. But back here we have the edit 3D settings. If you click there, you will be taken to the Sketchfab 3D editor. This is where you decide the materials that you're going to assign to your model, the kind of lights it is going to have, the post process that it's going to have, and what we want to pick here is the shading shadeless option. This will unlit our material and leave it as it is from the kind of look that we were looking for in Blender. You also have some limited how do you call this, Matcap materials that you can assign to your model. Okay, if you have the Pro version, you have more access to custom Matcaps that you can also upload on your own, as you can see right here. But I'm just going to show you around because all of these other settings correspond to the material. So either if you want to use opacity and alpha mask, a normal bump map, everything is there for you to configure. In my case, I'm just switching this to a metal Matcap and it looks cool. And this is the post-process screen where you can add different things. This is where you will see your animations if you have exported your model with animations as well. So let's exit this screen. And you can delete this model by clicking this button right here. So this will make sure that you do not have like exceeding models that you don't want in your account. And this is my account. As you can see, this is a free Sketchfab account that I'm using right now, and everyone can use as well. You can go to the Pro version as well to get more advantages. So we are going to be talking about the method 8. As we can see, there are advantages and pros and cons to using it in Blender as also in Sketchfab. As you can see, there are the biggest thing is the material configuration, whereas in method B, whenever you export a GLTF file, you will always get your materials in if you set them with the right nodes. As you can see right here from Blender, what you can do all the way to the Sketchfab, and it's only just a matter of activating post processes after that. This is all in the Sketchfab editor, so it is really convenient to export in GLTF format. It also supports animation. So now let's talk about the Sculpt paint faculties that Blender has. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the legacy attributes and the color attributes, which is the more modern attributes that you want to use in Blender. But whenever you set an attribute, it will automatically set a color attribute in the case that you're setting it up for Vertex Paint, which is what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to be adding this attribute. I'm going to name it col. Then I'm going to switch to data type color, and the domain I want to create this in is going to be in the Vertex domain. So that's what it's going to be adding to the boots in this case. Okay, so now the boots have the properties with the attributes called col. So I'm going to be Shift A, adding an attribute. I'm going to type attribute, and now I'm going to type col. That stands for color. And then you can see that I can change the attribute type, which in this case is geometry. This is the legacy way of doing this. I'm showing you this just in case that you're using an older Blender version. You can also add the color attribute, which basically represents the same thing, but just like I mentioned before, this is how we did it in the old days, and it still works because legacy Blender still works with 3.5 at the moment of this recording. So I'm going to be switching into Sculpt mode once again, and clicking on this paintbrush icon, it will get you to the Sculpt paint features. Okay, so I'm going to be coming here into solid material attribute, as you can see, and now I'm going to start painting. The color of the paint, it's pink at the moment. I can change that, so that's what I'm going to be doing. You can also switch the size of the brush and also the strength in this case. Let's switch to a blue color, and as you can see, the number of vertices determines how far the color painting goes. Okay, so if you want to switch from object to object, it is a very easy task to do it. So if you use Alt Q, you hover your mouse over the mesh area that you want, and then you press Alt Q, and it will automatically highlight that mesh for you, instead of going out of the sculpt mode into object mode and then back into sculpt mode. You can do this all the way inside the sculpt mode itself. So now let's talk about limit painting by using the topology auto masking. If you come here, you can set the paint limit all the way to topology. What that means is that it's going to respect the edges that separate from one topology to the other one. So that's very easy to understand. Now let's go and export this. Once again, selected objects, the mesh, export FBX. Let's go back into Sketchfab. I'm going to be clicking here, targeting my FBX file, which is called lex11, uploading it, and once I have it upload, I'm going to click on Edit 3D Settings. With that, I'm going to come into the material editor of Sketchfab, because we want to make sure that vertex color is active. And as you can see, it is active and it does display. So the boot is now blue color, just like we painted in a Blender. So now you can change and see that sRGB actually is the most close resemblance to what we had in Blender for the color. And now let's delete this, because now we know it works. So that's right. And color attribute works with background. Now let's change to a darker color, because what we want to do is to add some variance into the volume of this. And we also want to use one of the tools that we have available, which is the smear tool. The smear tool will allow you to blend basically between two colors by spreading the value of that attribute in the vertex and spread it, make it more diffuse, if we can call it that way, into other vertices around it. So now I'm going to be switching this to a lighter shade of blue, a blue sky color, and then I want to diffuse that. But as you can see, it gets very rough. I can see that it's too harsh, the jump from one color highlight to the darker parts of the blue. So what I'm going to do is to pick a lower shade of blue, in this case, to have it mix much better. And then I'm going to be using the diffuse, or in this case the smear tool, to do this much more subtle changes in the colors. Again, let's export again to FBX. I'm sorry, this is a mouthful. And we have it selected here. Now if you press this plus button, you will save an incremental file. So in our case, this is going to be called boot102. Again, we come to Sketchfab, import it, make sure that the vertex color is active, and also don't forget that we're going to be using this for anime models, so you really want to use the unlit version of it. But as you can see, if you come to the materials, I can see the boot material, and it's ready for changes in the properties of the appearance that it has for this material. In this case, if you want to use a PBR material, you can also assign them here in the base color for the glossiness and everything else that you need to set it realistically. But since we're using this for anime, what we're interested in is looking into the unlit material, or the shadeless, as this Sketchfab version calls it. So let's go over here, select shadeless, and as you can see now, it corresponds to what we had in Blender. We had the dark shade blue and the lighter shade of blue, plus the highlight that we tried to create using the blue sky color. So this is awesome. We already know how to export. We already know how to create a color attribute. Now let's change the background just a little bit so we can have the same kind of contrast that we have in Blender. So as you can see right here, this is exactly what we wanted. We can use the Paint Sculpt tools from Blender latest version. So now we're going to talk about how we can sculpt paint to texture. Not really using the vertices, we're going to be using the texture. So for that we need to create a texture, obviously, and from there on, if you switch to sculpt paint and then you paint, you will be painting into the material of that object. So let me show you how it works. From here in image, I'm going to be creating a new image, okay? Or you can also come down here into the shader node and create one image there. So in my case, I don't need that much resolution because I already know that I have very solid colors that I want to use for the boot. So let's name that boots. And from here, I'm going to be picking up a general color, which is also, this is just my personal workflow, the darkest color. I prefer to work with the darkest color, which is going to be the shadow color in this case of the general boot, because it's easier for me to paint highlights and it's quicker than instead of painting the entire thing dark. So that's why I always choose the darker color. Now I'm going to be saving this as a new name. I'm going to be naming this boots. Setting all of these things right here, PNG, RGB, 8 bits, and then save image. And now that I have it saved, I'm going to be adding it into my node and my shader node setup. Shift A, type image, and from there I'm going to be picking the material from this drop down list. But first of all, let's connect this to the color of the background, and since it's already color with vertex color, okay, you can see that because we have the attributes displaying the vertex color first. So let me switch that from the solid color to the texture color, which is the next following, don't forget this is attribute, the next following shader ball, as you can see right here. So now I can switch this and it will correspond to the color that we have in the viewport. But we want to use the texture. So what we're going to do is to connect this image texture, okay, to the boot material. So all we do is grab this color, plug it into color, and now we see it's black because it has not identified which image it's using. So from this drop down list, again, I'm going to be selecting boots, and now it is a darker boot. This is great, this is fantastic. Now let's test if this ports all the way to Sketchfab, and as you can see, my camera viewport is showing me the correct colors in vertex mode, but we want to know if we can carry an image map, all the way until the Sketchfab editor. So let's use Fbx again, and here comes the first thing you need to notice. We're going to save an incremental version of this. Let's export it, and I needed to save the image file to use here in the editor, in the Sketchfab editor. So let's click here. Let's see how it goes. I'm going to be selecting my boots in this case, and you can also assign the texture in the editor here in the Sketchfab. The way you do that is by selecting obviously the list from the material from the list, and then click here on the base color, and you have the option to click on texture and then import texture or set it to color. Okay, so let me just quickly switch that so you can see this is how a solid color looks. So even if you do not assign materials in Blender, you can come here and change how it looks directly from the edit material editor. But if I'm going to assign the texture, I will click texture and then I will look for the texture. In this case, it's this just blue solid color, so it carries over indeed, and that's all you need to do basically. So just click on that and this is your texture assigned. You have assigned your texture, and you can use a wrap on S or wrap on T to repeat, as you can see in these settings. You can also have the filtering options, and you can also displace it using UV transform. Not really displacing it, but rather modifying its position. That's what I meant. Okay, so you can use that. But in our case, we're not going to be using that. We just want to assign the texture directly to the boots from the material we created, specifically from the image we created in Blender. Now let's not forget that if you switch on your vertex color, this is important, they are going to be automatically set to be multiplied on top of your texture, and this is what Sketchfab officially reported that they do when I asked them about this behavior. So anyways, you can modify here all of the other properties for PBR maps in the case that you're using a semi-realistic anime model. Please remember we're doing this specifically for anime model, toon shading in Sketchfab. That's what we're working now. So as you can see right here, we are going to switch off the vertex color so that we can return, and if we're using the shading model lit, then that's not going to work as well. If we go back to shadeless, okay, but we have vertex color on, then that's going to be a problem. So you need to plan accordingly. Even if you switch to linear, which gives you a wider range for your material colors, it's going to be working in the wrong way. So now let's go back into masking by polygon selection. What is this? Whenever you're working in your model, there will be areas where you have already defined a clean cut, a clean shadow cut, where you want to assign a darker shade of the material that you're working with. In our case, I'm going to select this part of the boot, which is the lower part, and then I'm going to go into edit mode, and inside edit mode I'm going to select all of those and then switch to texture paint. And once I activate this icon that you see right here, I can switch to the bucket tool, and I will automatically fill whatever I have selected with that bucket's color. So what that icon there does is to create a limit by polygon selection of whatever area you want to paint. Now this is important because I have been repeating this all throughout my other Guilty Gear videos and also stylized 2D shaders. And my recommendation is always that you model according to how you want the shadow to fall upon your, in this case, model. We're working with a boot, but this example is good enough to represent whatever you want to do with lips, whatever you want to do with underlids, whatever you want to do with ears, whatever you want to do with neck muscles. Okay, you can define the way your geometry is going to cut, the way your geometry is going to be masked by polygons. Alright, so enough explanation there. Let's go back over here. Now that I have painted, I need to save this image. So I'm going to come here into image and then save, and it's called boots. Therefore, whenever we are going to export this, we need to also carry that texture out here. So let's go again, select the Fbx format, just because I'm going to be saving this as a new incremental. Again, back into Sketchfab, I'm going to target my Fbx, and once it's loaded, I'm going to go into the editor once again to edit the 3D settings, and I want to edit the material for the boot. Okay, so my boots are loading, my George model boots, I mean. And then I want to switch off the vertex color. We're not going to mix that right now. We're going to come here into materials, select from the drop down list the word boots, and from there on we want to go into base color, click on texture, and from texture import textures, target the boot that we have right now, which is this one. As you can see, it has been already painted, and since it was saved, I can see the shadows right under the darkest part of the boots. So it works, so it carries over. Again, don't forget we're working with shadeless material, so don't forget to go back here into lightning, into the general scene and set it to shadeless. All right. Even though this is a textured paint, you can clearly see that the area that was masked by the polygons, it's very sharp, it's very rough, it's very clean cut. So whenever you want to model shadows directly in the model, you can do it so and then mask them to paint them. That's a very important thing to note. Okay, so it works. Let's continue our experiments. Aren't you glad that you're watching this? What works, what doesn't work? Alright, let's continue with the next thing. And the next thing we want to use is the color attributes. As we already did, paint the vertex colors, and we already mentioned that the previous attributes are a sort of a legacy node attribute to define color for the vertices. But now we're going to use the color attribute, which is kind of like a secondary way to do it. So I'm going to be switching this to another color so you can see that it works. And right now, since I'm on Paint Sculpt, it will always be active on the latest experimental version. Okay, so in the case that you're watching this in Blender 3.5 and you don't know where this is, you need to activate it in the following version, which is 3.6, I guess, and then experimental tools, because this paint tool thing, this Paint Sculpt mode, is available on experimental. Again, I'm going to be defining this region for the polygons, and as you can see right here, I'm going to be setting them off so that I can paint outside my previous selection. Don't forget that we had a previous selection masking out our polygon selection, okay? That's why I could not paint. So now I'm going to be switching this back all the way to black again, because I just want to paint this everything black so you can notice the difference, okay? Really notice the difference. And now I'm going to be switching to a very bright green color. I don't know, yeah, let's go with a green color. I'm going to press E to change the mode of the stroke, and I'm going to select line. So the way line works is by first clicking and then dragging and then left clicking again, and it should paint. But there is an error currently on Blender 3. I think this is 3.4. There is a current error on this, so every time you undo, okay, then the line will get drawn. This is something that the devs need to take care of, but I'm pretty sure that by the time that you see this, it's probably going to be a reported bug fixed already, because that's the way the community works. It really works fast. So anyways, if you switch from solid to shaded color, then you can see that it's going to show immediately on the texture. So let's try again. I'll draw. You will not see it, don't worry about that. We already know it's a glitch. So if I go back to shaded and then back to solid, I will see it again. Anyways, let's do this. I'm going to write her name, Y-O-R, and then I'm going to use the line again just to create this. And I can even, like I mentioned before, I can switch here from solid to shaded, or Ctrl to Z. It will not undo it, it will just paint it. Anyways, I'm going to be saving this image now that it has been created, and now I'm going to export once again the texture painted. Even though it's connected with the color attribute, what we want to do now is to see the color of the texture. So I'm going to be cutting these links, and then I'm going to connect this into an emission node, because now you already know how it was done in the old days with Blender, but now let's use emission, which is the modern version of, you know, the material that it's going to be recognized in Sketchfab directly. So again, let's go through the whole hoop and finally assign the texture that we just created to the your boots, which are right here. And look at that, isn't that amazing? It is great. So we know it works. We know the color, whenever it's set to shadeless, it's going to represent the same color that we see in Blender. But let's go and take this one step further. We want to modify some more things here in Blender, first of all, so that we can use an emission post-processing in Sketchfab, okay? And I also want to show you the difference whenever you use the GLTF format. So let's go with that first. I'm going to be going to File, Export, GLTF, and I'm going to be naming this with a different name so that we don't get confused. And I'm going to show you the settings that I have. But for this specific thing, we need to click on the gear that we have up here, and then switch on the formats. You can also save presets that you can drop down there, but we're going to be focusing on format. We're going to be using the GLTF embed, okay? This is the important part. This is what it's going to compress everything into one single file and send it to Sketchfab. And we're going to select it, to select the objects, okay? Those are the ones that are going to be exported. And here are my other settings that I basically don't ever move, except if I'm exporting animation, which in our case is not going to be. But for now, just pay attention to what I'm doing with the materials and also for the other things that I have right here. I should also mention that GLTF supports lights, and you can ask the questions in the comment section below so that you'll know how to export a sunlight, a point lamp, etc. Okay, ask me about that. Alright, let's continue here, and we are down to the last settings. So we're going to just export GLTF2. It's the developers, and there are also some dedicated Blender users who are always updating the latest versions to the GLTF compatibility, and that's great. That's what makes the community so great. Alright, let's go and select this one. As you can see, there is a preview on Microsoft Windows, in this case 10 that I'm using. I can see the preview of the GLTF if you use the previewer on the Windows Explorer. So I'm going to upload the files, as you can see right now. We're going to go through the entire hoops again, edit the 3D settings. We're going to come here to the editor. By now you should be very familiar to where to look to change your settings, textures, and things. So again, I'm going to be using the Shadeless material, and as we mentioned before, we need to assign this to off, the vertex color off. And that's it. You did not need to set up the list of materials. This is not the Fbx format. This is the GLTF, which carries on the materials from Blender to Sketchfab, and this is just fantastic. And now let's work with the missions. When you click on the mission, you activate that. You have the choice to look for your texture. In my case, the boots are the same things that I'm going to be using, and therefore the darker color will not emit any light, but the green color will. Okay, and in order for recognizing or watching it on display, let's just lower down the background to a darker color and then come to the effects tab, and we need to activate the bloom. Once you do that, you're going to get this marvelous effect from this very bright shade of green that we selected in Blender. So it works. I mean, from here on, it's just onto your imagination. You can create robots, you can create laser beams, assign very bright textures to that, and then come here and export it into the GLTF format to be recognized into Sketchfab. Again, I just wanted to remind you that we're working all of this to create stylized anime to shaders to models, anime models specifically. Okay, if you want to do the PBR workflow, you're welcome, but this is not why we're doing this masterclass. We're working specifically for stylized models and shaders. So let's continue. Now that we know that this works, let's switch this to another color and let's try it with a different shade of blue in this case. I'm going to be freestyling some more. By the way, you press E to switch the stroke mode. In this case, I'm using space, and that is how I'm able to do all this freely. So let's continue our painting. What we want to do is to create defined areas where we can, see the glow, or rather the bloom in Sketchfab glow in different colors. Okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to also switch the way that the fall off it's working right now. I'm going to set it to constant. That way it gets sharper, it gets cleaner cuts, it gets much defined areas, if we can call it that way. Okay, and this is very interesting when we're creating our anime effects or our anime shading, because we can create these clean lines. Alright, so don't forget to always select your texture, and in this case I'm going to be saving the image. Again, we're going to be using one single export mode, which is the GLTF by default, if we can call it that way. It is the best method that I have found. So let's again, don't forget to click on GLTF embedded. That way all of the textures are going to go together with the objects that they are assigned with the material that you have created in Blender. As you can see, again, we can see the preview. Now we're going to upload it. Once it's uploaded, we're going to click in the editor to edit the 3D settings, this button right here. It loads, and once it loads, again, let's not forget that we want to work with the shadeless mode. So come here into shading, shadeless, and also switch off the vertex color, and as you can see, it's all there. It is working perfectly. So now you can sculpt paint your textures, and of course for that you need to UV unwrap the object beforehand, and from there on you can switch to Sketchfab. Come here into the material tab, click on the emission. I'm going to click on texture, select the texture that you're going to be using. In my case, it's going to be the same one, boots, and now it starts to glow when you go to the post effects and click on bloom, and voila, there you go. You can see that it is working perfectly. Look at those bright colors. You can also modify the bloom settings individually, as you can see right here, just the same way we can modify those bloom settings in Blender. Okay, so we're going to exit, and now we have created all of the necessary tests to know how this works, the way it works from Blender to Sketchfab, and the colors and the responsiveness from the emissions and the bloom and the vertex colors. From here on, let's create the real final model and textures that we're going to be uploading later on in the video with Yor. Okay, so now let's ask a really interesting question. If the vertex colors are defined by how many vertices are created in the mesh, what about multi-resolution? Can multi-resolution create more vertex, and can we paint those vertices created by the multi-resolution modifier? Now that's an interesting question, so let's put it in practice. Let's click here. Let's add, first of all, let's add the multi-res modifier, and let's add a subdivision level. Okay, so you just have to wait just a little bit, and once it's done, it's going to show you all of the levels subdivided here. So we have subdivided everything that we see right now in the viewport times 1. And if you go into sculpt mode, yeah, it's going to take you a little bit of time to paint. And of course, you will imagine that you're painting directly over the new created vertices with the modifier. But in reality, that's not going to happen. But anyways, I just wanted to show you how it works. Or how it does not work, actually. Because I'm experimenting for you, so that you don't have to experiment all of these things on your own, and no one will answer your questions. And even though if you're watching this from the future and it has been already implemented by someone in the community asking for it, that'd be great. But as of now, in this specific video, the multi-resolution is not working as we intended to work. So I can paint the vertex, but those vertices are not defined by the number of subdivisions that I have on the multi-resolution, so basically it does not work. So now let's talk about the outline by solidify. So what do we mean by that? Whenever you're creating anime materials or anime models, you want to export the outline that surrounds them by using the modifier with the solidify modifier that we have here in Blender. So the way you do that is to assign a material to it, of course, and I'm going to be using an emission, and I'm going to select the solidify, fill, flip the normals, open the material tab, and now I'm going to select number 1 because that's the number of the offset materials starting from 0 that I'm going to be using that specific emission material in this case. I'm using this very bright cyan color so that you can make difference of it when we're seeing it on the viewport. So we want to click on back face culling because we want to obscure, we want to hide the back faces, and this is the principal method to create the back face culling outline by solidify modifier. So in our case, again, we're going to go back to Sketchfab, import the boots, import the material, and everything is great. But where is our outline? Now you can drop down this list and get it from my own outline shader. That's the name I used in the shader material back in Blender. But again, we see it, everything not working correctly. So what do we need to do? If we go to explore face rendering, we can check double-sided, single-sided, but it's not working accordingly. So where do we need to go in order for us to make this outline appear? Well, it happens so that you need to select the material, and after you select the material, of course, we are going to select Shadeless. Okay, all of these developer options that you have right here help you to understand what could be wrong with your model. But that's not what we want. What we want to do is to export in the GLTF format, but apply the modifier. Because you can see it right here, but it has not been applied. Even if you apply it right now, before exporting as GLTF, it will show correctly later on. And also, at the time of export, whenever you choose the GLTF export option, okay, I'm doing tests here from the previous Blender version, in my case 3.4 and 3.3, and it happens so that it will not export, and it was because I needed to activate an option that says apply all modifiers before exporting to GLTF. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. From Blender 3.4, that option was enabled, so that's why I could get decent results, or rather the expected results, with the outliner. And as you can see, the material has been already set beforehand from Blender. And that was the only difference between 3.5 and 3.4. So now you can assign the emission and also have the bloom affecting the bright material that we use for the outline. Isn't that neat? Now you can get all creative and start exporting again from 3.5, selecting the GLTF embed. But this time we're going to scroll down to the settings and export apply modifier. So I'm going to exit this session. I'm going to be uploading my model once again, but first of all, let me delete this previous one. Click on upload, select the file, select the GLTF with the modifiers applied, upload the file, and let's go into the editor and see what we get. Don't forget to switch the shading method to unlit, and sure enough, we see our outline. In this case, I switched it to a bright cyan color, but we see black, which is not bad. That is what we wanted, but let's change that. So I'm going to click on my own outline shader, and then I'm going to target my texture as well, and then my own outline shader is going to be assigned to that cyan color we saw before once again, but this time being exported from 3.5, Blender 3.5. Alright, so now that we have vertex paint and texture paint modes, I'm going to be drawing this entire section specifically to create the textures, okay? So from here onwards, I'm going to be showing you my workflow for the Your character. Of course, she has been uploaded to Sketchfab, and everything that she has for materials are textures. So let me show you what I do. As you can see, all of the time I work with my light threshold materials, in this case for the toon shading. This is a very simple setup, not really complex. I'm just taking the geometry to create some rim lights and also mix them with some ramp shaders there, the ramp color ramp node. But what I really want is to have a way to bake, or rather to follow the direction of the light, and for that I'm going to be using the sketching or the annotation tool to define the region where I want my shadows to be, because right now I'm going to switch from using a procedural shader, which automatically detects the light direction and creates a shadow, and then I want to switch that to use paint, or rather a texture. You can also use Matcaps, like I'm going to show you right here. This is the most simple setup that you can get. Download any Matcap you want. In my case, I'm applying this to the thorns of the character, or the stacks how do you call these things, the pointy things that Jor has, okay, because I wanted to assign a material that could reflect sort of like gold when the light hits it, and has a direct vector to the camera. This is why I'm using this Matcap for her top crown, and also for the flowers, and also for the thorns, and also for the earrings and the weapons. So again, don't forget that Alt Q will allow you to switch whenever you're working in Sculpt mode, or even if you're working on Sculpt Paint, or also if you're working on paint modes like texture paints. Alt Q works for all of those modes, and they work marvelously. So you can switch and paint different materials with different textures just by switching with Alt Q if you have previously set them up beforehand. Okay, so that's important. And I'm showing you here that this works even when you have the paint sculpt tool selected. Now let's talk about the pros and cons from Vertex Paint. As you may have already noticed, we can use the Vertex Paint with much details if we have a subdivided mesh. So for every vertex we have in the mesh, we can spread the color more softly, because there are more vertices that will share their color properties between them. That will make a soft transition, but as you can see, even at 5x speed in this video, it really feels laggy. It really feels slow. It's very slow. Unless you're having a very big machine to work with, this is not the recommended workflow. I mean, you could, in theory, if you have a strong machine, like I mentioned before, but if you're not having a great machine, powerful machine, it's going to be very difficult. So that's something to take care of. That's something to keep in mind, that if you want a very soft transition between vertex colors, you need to subdivide your mesh even more, and that will lag your viewport. Of course, you can work with masks to mask out and hide the rest of the topology. That will kind of work if you really depend on Vertex Paint colors, but if not, I would recommend that you go with the texture method. So let's talk about the errors at the time of assigning an attributes to the vertex color. As you can see, since I switched back to 3.4 and then back to 3.5, something happened there that broke the legacy things, and I needed to reassign the complete attribute again. So I switch materials, and I can see that the materials work. Okay, but the face, as you can see right here, is not picking up the properties of the COL, the coal, the color that we created before, and also it's not picking up the skin property that we did. So I'm going to switch back just for a second to Blender 3.4. I'm going to name this skin. I'm going to create it in the domain of the vertices, sorry, and the properties are going to be color for color. So I'm going to type here skin, the same thing, and now I can see that if I switch to Vertex Paint and select any kind of paint, I should be able to paint. And of course I am, because that's the only color attribute that is being assigned at the moment. So I know it works, so it must be something else. Here we're going to troubleshoot this scene by looking at how many different attributes for the vertex color paint are enlisted in the vertex color property. So let's come here to the legacy. As we can see, we have something that's called skin. So if I remove that, and then I only have red lips, or if I create a new one, I want to make sure that it's set to color and the name it's attribute. So I should be writing here the name attribute instead of a skin. This is something that you need to take care of. Whenever you create an attribute, use that exact same name in the shader for attributes, okay? So that's why I see everything in black. So I try another method, which is going to append the entire scene. So what I'm doing here is to move everything inside that collection, which is called append. I'm going to open a new file, because sometimes files corrupt, and the way you can fix that is by cleaning up a new file, and then doing the file append, targeting the original source. In this case, go to the collection, and now I find append me. So append me collection brought everything back into this scene. Again, I'm experimenting for you so that you know the answers on how to troubleshoot this kind of situations, because in production you really need some help, and there is no phone number to call to, no email to write to. So therefore I do these long master classes so that you'll know what you're dealing with. Anyways, let's delete the materials. I'm going to be creating a new one which is called your skin, and inside that your skin, I'm going to delete this shader. I'm going to add the emission and then the attribute one. Alright, so let's change that color and assign it, and let's see if it does. Let's switch to shaded view. Alright, I'm picking up emission. This is good. Now I have all of these entire different attributes for color, so I'm going to delete everything. Okay, and this is the one that we were looking for, so I'm going to be calling this your skin. This is going to be set on the vertices, and the data type is going to be color. So that's what I'm going to type, your skin. And now I'm going to connect it into emission. And since the face had that attribute given, it should be colored as well. I'm trying again to paint here, and as you can see, it doesn't matter what I do. Even if I switch to solid view with the attributes to display, I will not get the your skin color. So what's going on? What's going on is that the ID data of these attributes are going to have been assigned, one on top of the other. So let's just clear everything out. Well, let's create a brand new one with a clean list. Your skin, okay? It's going to be assigned to colors, and now you will naturally see that this has been assigned to the only one attribute that is going to be displayed at the moment. So I'm going to go back into solid view, and as you can see, I can finally start painting. Then you will say, alright, Mr. Schiller, you made this entire loophole, and you only had to name your attributes correctly. Yes and no. Why do I say this? Because now we're going to go back into the original problematic file, but this time we're going to apply the right method, which is, just delete all of this old data, because like I mentioned before, and I did not realize this up until I came back to 3.5 from Blender 3.4. Some legacy attributes, like color, sometimes glitch with the material assignment, and therefore you need to create it in the newest Blender version to make sure stability. Okay, so that's why we have LTS versions, so that way anything created in LTS will stay constant, will not variate, but instead the latest versions of Blender will also mutate, will change. The AIP calls sometimes collide between themselves, and finally we're going to clean up that list. We're going to set this with the color attributes, which is the modern version of whatever we do on Blender 3.5. I'm sorry, 3.0 I think it is, forward. Okay, so I'm going to create it from the color attributes, and it will create it for the legacy attributes, as you can see right here. Don't worry about this. Blender is sometimes glitching some parts, because the general mentality of Blender is to preserve the legacy files. So the legacy files will open even if in the long run with more advanced Blender versions. This is why some of the changes need to be reviewed in proposals for code changes and stuff. You can ask me about that in the comment section down below. I don't want to discuss this on this video. Anyways, let's go back to Vertex Paint, and since we have a texture assigned with this, we can also display it here on the viewport, and the final render right here. We have to assign a new material for the face, and you can see now that this moves even slower. It works, it's not bad. Remember that we subdivided many times this mesh, so that's why it's kind of working sluggishly. Sorry, and I'm going to switch this to line, pressing E on the keyboard. and that will make a very sharp line because I also switched the how's it called, fall off. So this is what we want in animate styles with our models. We want clear, sharp lines to define the light and the shadows. But you can also switch that to a softer fall off for the brush, and then you will get these soft shades. But even though if you do that, you will still be limited to the number of vertices you have on your mesh. So therefore, if you have a very fast machine, it will be easier to work with this number of vertices. Otherwise, just work with textures. So now let's talk about UV unwrapping a post model. Mr. Schiller, you never do that. I learned in my original 3D software that you don't want to go in there. Well, you can. Here in Blender, you have the option to unwrap anything that has been already posed, if you have the right symmetry, of course. Now let's, I want to show you what it's going to do if we just directly unwrap it as it is. Okay, so we're going to get all of these messy lines. This is a problem because we even have to deal with that many subdivisions to be organized in the correct way in order for us to understand where we're painting. And that's not all, but if we are going to export this somewhere and someone else is going to, I don't know, let's say that they want to rig this back. This is going to be an absolute nightmare to paint for them because the UV unwrapping has been done incorrectly. So the first thing I want to do here is to go to decimate and unsubdivide this 4 times. Why do I pick 4 and not 6 or 12 or 11, whatever? I only pick multiples of 2, like 2, 4, 6, and maximum of 8. That's the number of times that I can unsubdivide something without breaking anything. So if I go to, like you said, like you saw before, unsubdividing this by 2 will give you a cleaner mesh like this right now. So I'm going to trace, or rather I'm going to place selections for edges so that I can press Ctrl E and then select the seam. That is what is called here in Blender to define a cut to later on be unwrapped with the UV unwrapping menu. So I want you to understand something. When we wear clothes like a shirt or a sweater, we have seam lines that join together that sweater, that jean, or even shoes. Okay, so you need to pay attention to that because that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm seaming an imaginary sweater for this body, and I'm seaming an imaginary pair of gloves for the hands. Okay, so that's what I'm doing right now. And as you can see, the most convenient loop that you can see in this cut or in this section, it's going to be from the inside of the arm, not so much from the outside of the arm. This makes sense because you don't want to have visible in front to the camera seams. You always want to hide your seams. Yeah, Mr. Schiller, but we're painting this in a single color, so why does that matter? There's no variance for the colors. Yes, I know, but that's a general principle that we do in production. We don't want to put the seams in front of the camera. We also want to look for the best way to hide them. Okay, so right now I'm, trying to look for the best seam as if I was sewing a glove. And back here I'm doing the seams again as if this was a shirt. And since I did this only in a single cut, it reveals where it's going to be seamed the best. So Ctrl E, clear seams, will clear the seams. And what I'm doing here is to selecting using Ctrl and right click. If you press right click at the end of a loop, it's going to select the entire loop. So now let's continue to divide or cut an imaginary line all the way around the neck as if this was a shirt. Also under the chest. This is a good part to also relax when it's UV unwrapping the model. And you can see right here we have the results. This is exactly what we wanted. This is more understandable. This is more likely to be painted in a good way. So we have an error here, and that is due because I did not correctly pick up the seam lines. Okay, it is still all together with the same hand sewed, or rather joined, and I need to find where that possible missing seam is at so that it can be divided. So I'm going to place my camera over here. I'm going to select this area so that it will show me, alright, it's the left arm. Okay, I picked up the vertices on the UV space, and by pushing the two arrows at the top of the editor, of the UV editor, I can see where the possible seam problem is. So it took me to the left hand, and from here, let me just clear this out, because this does not match, and probably that's also causing the trouble. Now let's go around the fingers. Where could it be? Alright, we have identified where the seam did not connect. So let's connect that and Control E, mark seams. And once we have that, I think we are ready to go and do Control U to unwrap this thing. So I'm going to select the entire mesh again, A, Control U, and then unwrap. And now you will see that the hands, specifically the left hands, have been unwrapped correctly. I can see the neck up here and the left hand correctly UV unwrapped. Okay, so I'm going to do this once again after doing some other minor changes, and I end up with this. Okay, pretty good. I'm not intending to do this perfectly, because at the moment I only care to understand where the bigger shapes are, because I'm going to be directly painting on the viewport, and that is what I'm after. So I'm going to go back into object mode, press / to go outside of isolation mode, or rather individual focus, and let's work in the shader. So let's wait for the shaders to compile. And as we discussed earlier, we have method 1 to create the textures. So if I connect this, I have a single color for the entire body. This is specifically for the body. I will assign another texture material for the face, and so on and so forth for the rest of the objects. So let's go to paint, texture paint, and now I'm going to press a spacebar. I have a special add-on by JF Matthew, which is called Sculpt Paint Wheel, and what that does is to create a shortcut for my painting materials. So I can choose opacity, I can choose other settings such as the radius for the brush. So right now I'm going to be setting my fall off to constant because I really want sharp lines, or rather sharp colors. I'm going to press E to change to line for the stroke mode, and this is easier and faster for me. This is my own personal workflow. You don't have to do it this way, but I'm just showing you so that you can see what options you have whenever you want to upload anime models from Blender to Sketchfab, and this is a fast way to do it. If you have a laptop, this method is convenient because it doesn't take as much resources as it would if you have a very subdivided mesh. And therefore it is convenient not only to have an optimized model mesh wise, it is convenient because when you upload a model to Sketchfab that goes beyond a certain numbers of vertices or above 100 megabytes, it's going to trim it. It's going to stop you from uploading, and it will say you need to go to upgrade your account in order for you to upload models beyond 110 megs or 100 megs. Anyways, so I'm using Blender 3.4, and I cannot use for this recording the Sculpt paint tools, but as you saw at the beginning of the video where I was using 3.4 experimental with the Sculpt paint tools, it does work. So if you're watching this video when you have Blender 3.5 installed, please know that you have the option to go to experimental settings and then pick up the paint sculpt tools. And if you remember, we tried to use the annotation tool to define where the regions of the shadows and lights were going to be. But right now I'm placing all of the lights and the shadows directly from the feedback of the camera. I'm not doing this physically accurate. I'm doing this stylistically with choices. Okay, I decide where I want to put the emphasis using the light and where I want to put the volumes using the shadows. Okay, so the same thing that I just mentioned applies for the crevices, the folds, and also the rest of the objects that we have right here. We want a very simple approach to this. Now you can see that the face is inheriting some of the colors of the body because that's a problem, and we need to assign a different material for the face, but we're going to be doing that later on. Alright, so let's create a new material with a new texture for the face, assign that material for the face. Let's rotate the UVs, and now we have an individual texture to paint on. And this is what we wanted because the space on the body could be reduced to only 1040 or 1080 by 1080, but I decided to create another texture because it's not really heavy. I think it's around 248 kbs, kilobytes. It's not that really big PNG file. So here we go. This is the progress that we have currently. We still have to change the flower materials, the weapons material as well, the dress material, the roses that the red has. I'm sorry, the dress has. I'm sorry, this is a mouthful. Anyways, let's try to design the rest of the body folds, and also let's try to put back the outline by solidify. Okay, this is great. This is looking great, but it's very like flat. It works, but you can stylize the thickness of the outline, and I want to show you that in some more minutes ahead. But let's first try to just optimize our area, our working area. And as you can see, these lines are too thick, so let's reduce that as much as possible, because as I mentioned before, and if you have read my blog post about the classic anime looks, we don't want very thick lines to define our models. That's what keeps away the 3D models per se, because thicker lines make it look very amateurish, amateur-like. That's what I meant. So let's refine here the solidify modifier, and we want to add a new vertex group. We're going to call this I don't know, line thickness. That seems logical. And what we're looking to create here is to actually assign all of the vertices from the body into that one line thickness material. Okay, so I'm going to assign 100% to that vertex group, and then we're going to use that vertex group into the modifier so that we can define how thick that is going to be. But in order for us to do that selectively, we need to specifically paint areas on the body that are going to have 100% influence versus different weight influences in other parts of the body. So let's continue. I want to click here on vertex group to create the separation mask, and you can also invert it by clicking there on the 2 arrow ways icon. Okay, so let's go into weight paint. I'm going to press forward bar, and now you can see that the entire body is marked red. Why is this? Because all the vertices have been assigned the same value, 100%, or in this case just 1. So the entire influence which in this case is represented by the color red, affects the entire body. But what we want to do is to affect specific areas, specifically talking about volumes, and I want to show you this right now. So I'm going to go into weight paint, okay? And you can either subtract what you already have, or we can do something smarter. We can assign no weight and then start painting the weight. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And in order for us to work in that way, let's grab everything again, and in line thickness, let's switch it back to weight 0. That way, anything we will assign, 001 for that matter, anything we will assign from the modifier for the outline, it's going to be a very low value. And now I want to switch this on to the brush draw with the weight of 1, and I want to paint in the middle of each, I want to say it this way, but carnosity area. Okay, where you see more flesh. Okay, where you see more flesh, that's where you want to paint like I'm doing right now. Okay, 100% assign those weights. Every time we see a fold, we want to assign it in a blue color, or 0.001. I'm sorry, 0.01. Okay, so that we can get this kind of results. You can see the difference, right? This is all where we painted the red vertex influence. That is to say, 1, the vertex weight of 1. So I'm going to switch back to weight paint, and as you can see, everything else is blue. So here we have another chunky area, we can call it that way, where we want to paint. Okay, so this is the chunky area. I like that. Let's paint this in red. Okay, 100% influence. I hope that you're really enjoying this masterclass, because I'm taking the time to experiment everything before your eyes, so you don't have to do these experiments on your own, because you know, sometimes it's difficult to experiment, and then if something goes wrong, you don't have anyone to call to. But you can ask me any kind of questions in the comment section down below. Anything that you want to know about this entire process, about painting stylized characters, or assigning vertex paint, or assigning textures that can be represented in the same way in Sketchfab using the anime style, please let me know. Just write your questions or your comments in the comment section down below. I'll be happy to answer them. So let's continue with the body. I'm here marking the areas where I know that the camera is going to pick up some kind of vertex. It's going to pick up some kind of edge, if we can call it that way. Okay, so I'm just imagining, okay, if I have a camera in the front, all of these areas right here, I want them really defined, in this case a little bit thicker than the rest of the folds, because whenever we have folds, we don't want to have emphasis on the line. Now this is all guided by art direction, so it's very important that you have an experienced person doing this, but with this you can get up and running and define better edges or better outlines by the solidify modifier assigned. Like, look at that shoulder, look at that elbow, look at that crevice in the fold of the arm. So it's I'm not doing this randomly. This is the result of experimenting like years for now. But basically it boils down to what you want the camera to see and what you want the viewer to see through that pose. And as you can see, we have much interesting results. Look at that. You remember those annotations we did at the beginning, right? For the arm, for the elbow. Now we can really see it shine, because it really gives a conveying harmonious shape. Look at that. Look at this. Look at that. It's wonderful. Okay, simple lines, simple definitions. And I also wanted to mention something that is very important that I see most of the time people fail to do this. And if you want to look like a pro, you really need to define your inner lines. Please pay attention to this, because it's important. The reason why 90% of the models that kind of try to look like anime fail is because they do not have a clear defined internal lines, and those are important. the objects that your character wears, or the uniforms that your character wears, need to have clear defined inner lines. That's what makes a better contrasty character definition at the moment of visual reading. Okay, that's what gives away if your model is prepared or not for a 2D shot. So the more definitions you do in 2D, like rough sketching drawings and stuff like that for the character's uniform or the character's items, those same lines that define those same little volumes or little details on the uniform will allow you to create a better cartoony 2D comic look, 2D shader, however you want to call it, a better aspect for your character. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to refine and simplify as much as I can the entire shadows in the body, in the face, and also later on we will see in the hair. So that's the hair color. We see that quick capture of Jor being surprised, and now we're going to change her materials, in this case for the boots, as they really are, because we want to not really bake but follow what the natural light was helping us to define in the previous model when we had the procedural shaders. So we already, captured that image. You can also reference it, you can render it out and reference it for this specific camera angle, the one that you see on the right hand. But most of us 3D artists, 2D artists have a photographic memory. That's not any kind of mystery for anyone. That's why you're an artist, and you can, reference from memory the kind of light you had before starting to paint the textures on your character. So right now I'm following the reference from the show. This is important because you also want your character to have the same kind of shadow design. I have already talked about this. Please click on the card capture up here on the eye icon on the top right, and you will see why defining clear shadows is important, specifically to create anime, because there's a big misconception when you create characters in 3D. Most of the people I know, I don't know why do they think this, most of the people I know think that creating characters in 3D means actually to create them with all fancy materials. No, the simplified materials you use, the better your character looks. Alright, let's talk about baking. Baking textures using cycles, making procedural textures in cycle. In our case, we want to create a new image node, and we want to assign a general color, and after that we want to switch from EV to cycles, and we want to select on cycles the property that we want to bake. Okay, it's going to be a transparency thing, so let's select that material. Okay, it's an empty file, or rather an empty image, which I have called /glow as a material. And now I'm going to come here, switch back from EV to cycles. You scroll down. Let's deactivate this denoising things because this is going to just mess up our bake. And from the bake type, you need to select the emission, like right here, emit. Whoops, sorry, not that. It's transmission. I mispronounced this thing. Transmission. Transmission is the one parameter that drives the texture for transparencies. Okay, so that's why we're going to pick it up, and everything else is as default. So make sure that you have the object in the viewport, and make sure you have the material selected on the shader tree. Once you have those two things specifically selected, then you can come here into the render parameters and click on bake, this big button that you have right here. So make sure that you're on transmission. It's great. Click on bake, and yes, your object and your shader, in this case the image shader, needs to be selected. So I'm going to be fast forwarding this because it took like around 5 minutes to bake. And now if I connect this to an emission and use the color, of course I'm not going to get anything but white, because transmission is baked with white and black and white. Okay, but what we really need to use, it's the alpha. And you can see the alpha has been defined again by a black and white color. But if we use that black and white color from the alpha, that means that we can use any other color to drive the real slash color. We need to export as an RGBA, which represents the alpha. The A at the end represents the alpha. So let's put this on test. I'm going to use a principal BSDF, and then I'm going to be connecting this specific bake to the alpha, as you can see right there. And immediately it shows the results. Okay, it's there. So now I can select the base color as yellow, and you will see that the slash takes its color. I can also change the emission if I want to total white, and it will look good. But in case that you prefer the other color, then just leave it at default as it was before. So now that we know that that works, let's go back to Eevee. Don't forget to use the transparency properties for this material. Let's use the solidify for the dress. In this case, I'm going to be switching to this, flipping the normals, using the 1 material, or rather 2. Let's just make this a little bit smaller, like this. Okay, that looks good. Very nice outline in the dress. Very dynamic lines, by the way. And now let's talk about hair texture. Mr. Schiller, can we bake hair? Can we make the procedural highlights that we have learned from other videos and other tutorials? How do we bake that in Blender? Well, you can do that depending on how the shader is set up. What I'm going to do right now is to show you what I use. Okay, and basically I'm not going to be using any kind of baking trick or any other setup except by doing this by texture, just like I mentioned before. This is my own personal workflow. But what I will show you though is how I use the mask to create the shadows for the hair. As you can see right here, I always use a texture to define the mask for hair. This is important. You can see it right here because that's where I limit where the light is going to hit. Contrary to what everyone thinks, when you're creating anime models, anime characters in 3D, you're not thinking in terms of what do I need to shadow or where do I put the light to put the shadows. No, you're thinking, you gotta think backwards. You gotta think everything is lit. Where do I need to define the light? Up to what point I want to stop the light. Okay? So, just like I mentioned before, it is easier to have a wide area already colored in the shadow color and then paint a little bit of highlight than painting everything in a single color and then painting a shadow and then painting a highlight. That's not the way it works for anime, which is another thing I want to mention in this video. When you're thinking in anime, you're thinking in speed, you're thinking in simplified processes, you're thinking in simplified materials, you're thinking in simplified readable silhouettes, poses, and actions. Okay? So that's what you want to think. You don't want to overdo your materials, you don't want to over saturate colors. You really need to define a lot of things in 2D first so that you can emulate and imitate that same style in your 3D renders. The more 2D you have your first initial concept design or your first initial character design, the more 2D is going to look when you finish your 3D model. Okay, this is important and this comes by practice. Okay, anyways, let's continue with this your model. I'm going to be switching the highlights for the hair right here. You can see it right here. They have been modeled, and I shrink wrapped these circles and subdivide them some more to be adapted to the shape of the hair. And now I'm going to be assigning a emission color that matches a little bit of the original hair color back there. And let's delete everything and let's just leave this with an emission. Now don't forget that whenever you export a GLTF file, Blender does carry the emission shader directly to Sketchfab. as well as the principal BSDF shader directly to Sketchfab, and also the textures that you have connected into those respective colors for the materials. Okay, I'm going to be creating a new image texture where I'm going to be assigning the flower, the crown, the thorn, the spikes, and also the earrings. So let's connect this right here, and everything looks dull, very bad. But it's a fortunate thing that we have already unwrapped this previously. Now, I have not shown this in this video because I wanted to show you specifically how the workflow goes whenever I'm preparing a model to give away for free. First of all, to give away to Patreons, and then to give away for free to the general public 1 or 2 months after the patrons have gotten it. So Patreons got this model way before in 2022, okay? But now you're getting it for free, and I'm also taking this opportunity to explain to you how much work one of these single models takes for me to publish. Okay, it's not as easy as creating one every week, because I also have commissions, I have client work, family time, and due diligences to complete every day, you know. But still, I really like what I do here. I feel that Mr. Motomuros, the presenter of the Guilty Gear conference back in 2015, what his words said are very important. And he said that the frontier for new stylized animation is there, waiting for anyone who wants to adventure themselves to discover new methods, to discover new things, or rather implement the things that have been already established in order to create better stylized animation. And I really think those words resonate with everyone here in the community, which is why I'm very grateful that you're following this video all the way up until this point. I really want to thank you, and I really appreciate it whenever you share this kind of materials with other fellow artists, specifically working in Blender. So let's continue. Now what I'm doing here is to UV unwrap the hair. I apply the modifiers that it had because this was a curve. I think it was a curve. I have a whole video about how to create hair curves. Okay, please check those cards that you're looking on the screen right now on the upper right part of this video, and you will see how I create hair, and it is a good starting point for your models as well. And once I have unwrapped the entire hair, I'm going to be coloring this with the reference once again, specifically to define these hair areas, these hair folds. Now another thing I want to add, because I see this as the third most commonly mistake that some users do when creating their models, when they create their anime models, is that they use a pure black to define the outlines, a pure black to define edges, a pure black to define uniforms, clothes, and that's wrong. Okay, you don't want to use pure black. You want to use kind of a very dark gray color, okay, but not black. Why is this? Because in the old days, whenever they used to draw on cells, the reflective materials of the cells, unless it was used with a very dark tint, which is called the Indian ink, will absorb the surrounding colors and the surrounding reflective materials. Although the setup in the studio was created to not reflect certain light properties, this would also cause some troubles at the time of photography, but you can read about that in my blog. Now let's continue to export this. Okay, so what you're seeing right here is my real-time compositor, and this is a simple setup that I created specifically for this experiment JOR file. Now that you have downloaded the original file, you can see that it has been simplified as much as I could, but the idea here is to have JOR composed against a background. And what I'm doing right now is to take a look at the things and objects that I have already textured and what other things need to be done. So if I select the rig and I move it, everything moves with it, and we don't want that. We want to do what we did in the first 12 minutes of this video, which was apply the armature to every object in the pose that it's currently on. And why do we want to do that? Because at the time of export, we don't want to export any extra objects, because that will inflate, that will chunk up our file, and Sketchfab will probably reject it. So we want this file as clean as possible. So let's select the hair, let's select this dress, let's apply it, and then we find the error. We already discussed about this. We need to apply the corrective shapes. As we mentioned before, the first thing you need to do is to delete the basis and then delete the corrective shape. And this is done for every other object wherever you apply the corrective shape. We applied corrective shape 001 to every other object as well, naming it the same way so that we do not get confused that this is the first corrective. If you want to apply a secondary corrective, of course, you will number it at 002, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to fast forward this because I'm applying it for the eyes, for the eyebrows, for the eyelashes, for the dress, for the gloves, and also for the hair and every other object that Jor has. Even the internal head that I created to mold the hair around. Look at that. I'm also doing that for the eyelids and everything that has the eye, such as the eye highlights. Okay, so now that we can move our rig and nothing else drags with it, we can clearly have our defined model already textured with emission shaders. So now let's save this as the final version to export. As you can see, I do save a lot, but it's basically whenever I'm making big changes to the model. And this looks good. This looks actually very good. This part specifically look awesome, and this glove still has a procedural material, so let's just remove that because it's using a bump. You can use a normal map, by the way, in combination with shader, the PBR shader in Sketchfab, but I'm not going to do that. We also switch from the procedural Matcap to the textures for the spikes or the weapons in this case. So yeah, basically we have everything ready to export to Sketchfab. And you have here method 1, which is texture, and method 2, the vertex colors. This we discussed at the beginning of the video. Now you know the advantages, the pros and cons of using that. Let's see what else. The face. Oh, so let me go to the material list, and here we go. Oops, no. Okay, yeah, no, we're okay, we're good. So this is texture as well, and you can see this, the swipe material, and also the spikes or the weapons. They are also okay. So now let's name this as the final file to export to GLTF, in this case to Sketchfab. And like I mentioned before, I'm not able to export the entire character. There are some things that were limited in my case, so that you can see this later. Now, one last thing I really want to recommend is that you also check your origin points. Your origins should also be at 0. If you don't want any kind of piece flying around in 3D space when you go to Sketchfab, make sure to press Ctrl A and then apply all of the rotations and scaling and position for the object that you're selecting. So make sure that everything is set at 0, 0, 0, just like I'm doing right now. It's at the center of the origin of the world. That's exactly what we want. And that way it's going to work perfectly when you export it into Sketchfab. Okay? So always make sure that you select every object and that you inspect that every object has its right size. Otherwise, when you apply the outline modifier, or rather the solidify modifier, you could end up with very thick lines that are not suitable for exporting or for the style that you're looking for. So when everything is at 0 for scaling, for rotation, you can export that into File, Export, GLTF, I'm going to be naming this with a different name to identify the final export. So in my case, your forger post. Yeah, I think that will do. And then GLTF. I'm going to copy this path, and this is all my settings, selected objects to export. These are all my settings for the GLTF file, and you can see here that for now we're not going to be including any animation, but if this was rigged, we could include animation, and that will bake the NLA track with the original name for that action. That's something that has come to Blender in recent versions since the BCon 2022 Blender conference, for those of you who don't know. Anyway, so we have all this ready. Export. Let's go back to sketchfab.com, and now we're going to upload this model, and let's target our directory. We can see the entire model weighs 110 megabytes, but there she is. And we have a little issue with the dress, with the dress color. As you can see, it's pure white, and we don't want that. That should have changed. But anyways, let's open this, and then you will get notified your file is too large. The maximum free size allowed for your plan is 100 megabytes. Otherwise, you will have to move to a paid option. Of course, you will have many advantages for that, but let's do something else instead. I'm going to be exporting just parts of this model so that you can see that the model correctly was exported, and also that had the correct materials. By the way, let's also modify this dress leather material, which is the one that's causing the issue. Let's see how it looks in the viewport. Okay, that kind of looks the same. Let me just modify it a little bit so that we can get a much appealing color for this dress. Maybe something like that. Yeah, that looks anime enough. Yeah, don't forget that whatever color you choose for your color palette on your character is also going to influence how people perceives your character, how people learns about your character. So she uses very plain, very dark colors. So I'm going to be selecting these specific parts to export, like the hair, the eyes, the face, and also the swipe, the slash, sorry, the transparent slash, because we want everything all together inside one single file, which is the GLTF file, in this case embedded GLTF, which grabs everything that it's connected to the shaders and the materials, and then it automatically reads it once it's on Sketchfab. So now we get to 98 megabytes. That's more than enough, and now it will allow us to post. Now remember one other thing, and that is that the modifiers to create the outline, which were the solidify modifiers on different parts of the body, were just limited to the hair. Okay, so we're only going to see that on the hair and also on one of the spikes. That's all. So here she is. As you can see, she is completed. She looks plain, exactly how we want it. But now we need to further modify her scene in Sketchfab. Okay, so this is how she looks. That's great. And here we have the entire list of materials. So the first thing, let's go to Shadeless, because we want shadeless material. Let's look for the shadows, or sorry, the eyelashes. The material for the eyelashes. Okay, we have it right here from the materials list. And now we can choose the base color with a kind of darker gray. Please remember what we mentioned before. We don't want a full black, we want a darker gray. So now you can see that the hair has an outline marked in white color. We want to change that into a dark gray, or rather black color in this case, because it's hair. I mean, it actually would make sense that if it was a darker color than the dark green color that she has right there. But anyways, you can see right here, she has been completed. And if we had the Pro account, we could upload the entire thing, even using the rest of the modifiers, and that will actually double the size of the polygons, of the polygon count. So now I'm also going to change the weapons outline. As you can see right here, it works. Alright, so that's that, and she looks perfect. The swipe thing works really good. I mean, if you move the camera like this, you can actually get the sense of the action. Alright, so what else can we do with her? Well, at this point, you have already completed the entire workflow as you have seen in the first 12 minutes. And in case you stayed up until this moment, thank you so much for your patience. You have already learned a lot of the things that a common workflow to export an anime character from Blender to Sketchfab really has, with all its caveats. So now we're going to switch into the post-processing, filters, and we're going to add grain. As you know, an important part of creating anime is to replicate the classic grainy noise that you can see on some of the older anime shows. So you can even animate that with this checkbox down here. Okay, so if you uncheck it, then the noise stays still. That is mostly what we want. We can also add chromatic aberration. Don't forget that each parameter has their own customizable sub parameters. Okay, so here in the chromatic aberration, we can lower the intensity as well, and we can also control the bloom. If you open up here, the parameters are exhibited, and then you can modify them to your liking. For example, the radius, I don't want this to be too far from the body. I want a very concentrated light, a very harsh light on her with the bloom. Okay, so that's mostly about it, and this masterclass is about to finish, so I hope you have liked these results. As the last thing I want to mention is that there are new features coming into Blender 3.5, which are absolutely marvelous. It will allow you to speed up your workflow when creating anime stylized animations. Okay, and let's conclude this Sketchfab export here. Let's talk about the real-time compositing in Blender, which is one of the features that has me very happy with the development of Blender. The developers are doing a really great job. I know this is a very difficult task to bring on, and the real-time compositing is really changing the way I'm approaching to anime production in of itself, because previously we had to rely on third-party softwares to create the composition, but this is the first time in, I can say, history, in 3D history, where we can actually draft the composition itself directly from a 3D viewport, specifically from a 3D object. And this is just the beginning. So I did this anime cell shading. If, by the way, you don't know, I created so that it could be user-friendly in case that you want to experiment with the new features in Blender 3.5. It's a really simple anime shading, but created not for the object but for the compositor. So here you go. You can connect this image in the alpha, in the background, the grain, and the settings for the grain, and that's mostly it. Then you have the tinting character. If you select the node, press tab, you're going to go into the node, and then you can read every label I placed for the frames that you can see there. But the most important factor that you may tweak is this tinting character gradient, which gives the integrated color with the background from this node to your character. That way you can switch it, in this case green, to match the background proportion for that area, in this case, which is green. Okay, so now I'm going to scale this so that you can use this with crop and also to fit the viewport. And I have a complete video about that, a 10-minute video that's much shorter. And the important thing there is that you activate this pass part out setting all the way to 1, and then the viewport will react to the correct size to the overlays, for example the grain overlay or the background. So that's mostly about it. Thank you so much for joining me in this live stream. At the moment, the real-time compositor is on beta, or rather in an experimental feature inside Blender 3.5. And of course, if you select the node, press tab in the compositor, you're going to read, as I mentioned before, the different parameters that create this effect. Okay, I did this as a very basic approach because there could be more layers and there could be more nodes to connect this shader and make it more 100% customizable. But in this case, I've limited the number of parameters because there are some drivers that just literally break and they cannot be imported or appended onto other scenes. So that's going to have to wait just for a little bit more time when it is released in the solid release in the coming weeks. So here we have another scene. This is just to test the compositing node again. And in this time we're looking at two mechs fighting, and both of them are in this post-apocalyptic scenario. And I'm also going to include this stretch factor by using the scale node to fill the entire screen, or rather the camera is what I meant. And we're also going to add the noise image. So anyways, you can check out this entire video on my channel. If you don't know me, I am Pierre Schiller. I am a 3D animator and VFX compositor with over 20 years of experience, and I'm very happy to bring you this masterclass so that you know how to appropriately export Blender models in 3D with the anime style into Sketchfab. Thank you so much.